post assignments. All units proceed to your post assignments.
I didn't realize I was in prison.
Last week you scolded me when I used the F word, so I hope it's okay. WTF.
WTF's fine, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we never want to say what the...
Exactly. This is a big WTF, and I know it's getting tedious, so I don't even want to spend that much time on it, but this time Scott wasn't even given a reason, not even an alleged offense, not even a bad, ridiculous alleged offense, just simply told that he's permanently suspended. So once again, we're asking people to rattle Elon Musk's cage, and we're going to try to find out why this is going on, what is going on. Please go to my Twitter page and retweet it. It's what you just saw is the video that's in the tweet at Citizen Jeff. That's my Twitter handle. It's pinned to my page because I have an account, at Citizen Jeff. And the last time we did it, his account got restored. So I don't know, maybe lightning will strike twice again. Speaking of which, this is the lightning round. What a segue.
We don't want lightning to strike. The idea is not to get hit by lightning.
Oh, all right. Anyway.
By the way, what was that new music in the lead-in?
Well, I changed it around because I used the theme in the Twitter tweet. I didn't want to use it twice.
I know, but I mean, what was it?
I don't know. We should give credit to it. You're right. Let me work on that. I failed to do that.
People might begin to think that I'm some sort of classical music enthusiast. And if they're going to ask me questions, I should be able to at least fake it by saying, that was Wagner or something like that.
All right. We'll put an asterisk next to that, and I will look into it. I thought it had a nice segue into the next. There's actually another tune after that for the opening with Kevin and Maverick, too. I don't know if you noticed that part. My old radio DJ skills kicked in there. It was a very nice segue, if I do say so myself.
I heard a needle jump. But
a needle. The kids.
Because that's what you were using back when you were a DJ.
Right. And payphones. That went the way of payphones. So, Scott, we were also last week I said we're in the lemonade business. And I don't know if that's what was on your mind at all, but you did just that. Life gave Scott lemons when the Russian Samovar event was canceled. And there was a Plan B replacement that not only was a big success in terms of attendance and a great speech and everybody had a great time, but it was a clarifying moment for you as well. And it has to do with something you already believed in, but that's sometimes how epiphanies work. It's not necessarily a brand new idea, but we see it in a new way. And I love Trust But Verify. It's great advice for just ordinary life. I know that when I'm involved in some kind of collaboration with somebody or any kind of a relationship and somebody doubts me, they think I might be lying about something, it drives me crazy when the thing that they doubt me about is actually verifiable. I'm like, what, because you're too stupid and or lazy to verify it, you're going to accuse me of lying? So I love Trust But Verify. That's what I want from people with whom I have a relationship, and it's just a great truism. So what's the story on this epiphany that you had?
Well, it's not a story. I mean, first of all, this was a lot of people went through a lot of effort to make this thing happen. And it was, nerve-wracking is not the right term, but it was, it was a break from what was supposed to be. So people were jumping through hoops and, up until the last second was, is it happening? Is it isn't happening? How many books do I need to bring? And the whole logistics of it. So, literally I pulled up to the place at, 1 minute to noon. And got the books off, then got parked, and then came in, and didn't have. And then you're dealing with people coming in who you haven't met, and it was all wonderful. But my brain isn't in the mode of clear the air. And have you ever seen that movie with Kevin Costner, where he pitches the perfect game.
Can't say I have, but
it's a great baseball movie. But his whole thing is when he's on the mound, he clears the air and he just focuses on the pitch. And normally before speaking, I'll just clear the air and go through, okay, talking points, But this time I didn't have the opportunity to do that. So I was a little bit, I won't say frazzled, but it was like, time to get up and speak and say what. And so I just did it. And I think it went really, really well. But then in the question and answer period, people hold you to account. I mean, that's one of the dangers of a question and answer period, is that you say these grand things and suddenly everybody's like, yeah, but boom. And, one of the big ones is, how good is freedom of speech if you don't have, implementation? If you don't follow through, then you're just sort of, talking to a mirror. It's not any good. And so they kept pressing me in what's next. And one of the big ones, the one that set it off, was when people said, trust but verify. Because I said that was my thing. That was from the INF Treaty: trust but verify. They said, okay, but how can you have trust when Russia and the United States just don't trust each other anymore? Especially Russia not trusting the United States, which they're right. It's not Russia that withdrew from these treaties, violated things, and all. It's the United States. And that's when you and I have been talking for some time now about what to do about this book and how we can turn this into something bigger and better. Because it's a good book. I mean, it's not just, that's another good book. I was talking about this one. Get that book. I'll get to the other book in a second.
Well, you actually talked about both in this article, so that's why
I did. Well, I talked about it in the presentation too. It started off with disarmament in the time of perestroika, and I call it a template of hope, meaning that people who despair about what's going on today, I say, look, we had a similar situation in the 1980s, but the INF Treaty was signed and it got both nations out of this, Cold War mentality into a better place where nuclear disarmament took place, got rid of nuclear weapons that threatened world survival and all that stuff. So it means, we know how to do it. And it's a template of hope, meaning we could do it again if we just create the conditions for it, if we allow it to happen. And everybody went, okay, and, that's the big one. And, don't sit there and, blow smoke at us. Tell us next. And you and I have talked about that. We've talked about our frustration with the anti-war movement, with any activism in general. A lot of noble ideas, but very little execution, at least execution that results in something that is a victory. And I don't like to participate in futile exercises. You know that. You and I participated in the ultimate futile exercise back in the early 2000s with the anti-war movement, trying to stop the war in Iraq, even though we were empowered with the data, the information that proved this war was based on a lie. Even with all that empowerment, we couldn't, move it forward. So I'm a little disheartened with it, but I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan last year in December and met some well-meaning peace activists. And we talked about this issue. And at that time, you and I had been talking about breathing life into another book, Q.
Oh, okay. I didn't even have my finger there.
Man, Jeff,
I was quick to be. I was quicker.
There
when
it
I
is.
was wrong.
Waging Peace. Right. And the idea was to repurpose this book. This book came out in 2007. It was a primer for the anti-war movement. It went over like a lead brick, lead balloon, and but I think it's still a good book, and people who've read it say it's a good book. So the idea was
when you say it actually went over well, it's just that people didn't take action afterwards. But it was received well, both the book and your talks that went with it.
You're right. But we didn't. Again, the concept of futility. So I wrote a book, I spoke, it was written, and then nothing happens. And so you and I talked about how we can take this book and use it as and create some sort of framework, an organizing principle to take activism and move it in a certain direction. And we're actually working with people right now to make this happen. So it's not as though it's just theory. We've reached out, we've identified potential beta test environments, and we're working with somebody who has similar thoughts to flesh out this. But it still lacks focus because the concept is the art of war for the American activist movement. We still don't know what the new title is going to be, but it's not going to be the anti-war movement. But in talking, I went, I know what my vision is now. My vision is we're going to motivate the hell out of a new nuclear disarmament movement in America. One of the guys asked a question, and in the preface to his question, he brought up 1982. I think it was in June of 1982. A million people.
Yeah, I forgot all about that. So that's,
So did I.
think about that. If you could, you forgot about it too, right? If you got a million people then too, why not now, right? So,
Oh, now we need to get more. But
Yeah.
so it got a million people in Central Park to not protest against something, but to protest for something, for nuclear disarmament and for an end to the nuclear arms race. And I'm like, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Especially because now we come to trust but verify. See, verification, that's the business of governments. That's the technical stuff for treaties that, we send Ritter and people over to do this. They send, Yvonne and some other people over to do this, and all this stuff happens. That's treaty crap. And even though I used to do it as a private citizen today, I may think I have ideas, but frankly speaking, that stuff left to the guys who actually are paid to do that right now. We come back to the trust aspect of it. America doesn't trust Russia, and Russia probably doesn't trust America for cause. And if we leave it up to the politicians, they're never going to trust one another, ever. In the United States, we exploit the ignorance of the American people about the truth of what Russia is and what the nation is. We promote Russophobia that generates fear, and that fear makes the people perceptive or receptive to being pre-programmed to view Russia as the enemy all over again. We're doing it all over again. The question is, how do we overcome that? And so the job of trust now is sort of put on us. Trust verifies them, trust. How do we get people to trust us? And now we come back to the first book. It's right now, this may not be a news flash, but I'll say it anyway. It's being translated. I think it's actually been translated into Russian. And we're in the process now of finding a Russian publisher.
Right.
And when we find the Russian publisher, it is my intention to go on a Russian book tour, to go to Russia and take this book and the template of hope to the Russian people. And I think it'll be well received. From the vibe I'm getting back from the Telegram channel and the significant Russian participation in that, it appears it'll be well received, not only in certain areas in Moscow and St. Petersburg, throughout the breadth of Russia, which is great. But now we come to the thing again. If a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, did the tree fall? So Scott Ritter goes to Russia with his book and has great discussions with the Russians, and no American hears about it. Did Scott Ritter go to Russia?
Right.
The answer might as well be no. So now, how do we bring this back to America? And you and I talked about this. We're gonna film it. We're gonna make a documentary film. We're going to bring a person who is going to capture the experience, not just me speaking. That's the boring part. The important part is how this has an impact on Russians, to talk to the Russian people about how this resonated with them, et cetera, and then use that to identify within Russia nodes of interest, hopefully places that are identified with cities where people say, we'd like to communicate with our American citizen counterparts about this issue. And then we come back and we turn that into a documentary film that we then, having mobilized an American activist movement through waging peace and whatever we're doing there, we take that film and we get nodes in America to see that the Russians don't hate them, the Russians don't fear them, that the Russians want peace, just like we want peace, to create this mutual call for peace, to motivate people, get them to start communicating with other. And you know how this thing ends in my book, in my mind, my dream, my passion is we get 1 million people in Central Park and we get 1 million people in Moscow, not protesting against each other, demonstrating for each other, in support of each other, for nuclear disarmament, for arms control, telling their leadership, we trust each other. We trust each other to do this, and now we insist that you take action, and hopefully get them to start the process of meaningful arms control. Maybe it's limited to just breathing life into the INF treaty. Maybe they can get a new START treaty. Maybe they can do more, but to get them to do something, And that's our job. That's our mission. That's my mission now, and I hope it becomes your mission. And
Absolutely,
I hope
absolutely.
everybody's
You
mission.
clearly have a very a vision that's very well developed in your mind, and it'll be my pleasure to help you develop it on a tangible level too.
And I met with, I mean, I'm not going to say his name on air but I've talked to you about him. The guy I had lunch with yesterday. And
let's call him Skippy.
Skippy.
Yes.
Please, Skippy, don't be insulted by the name. But Skippy said that I bounced this off of him, and without any prompting, I didn't ask for anything. I just said this was an idea. He said that is something that he and others would be willing to support financially. Fantastic. So as this thing matures, I think, because having made a documentary film,
a good one, which, by the way, people can watch in its entirety on our YouTube channel.
Yeah. So all the people out there that say, well, Ritter's talking documentary films, what the hell does he know about? I made one. Look at it.
In Shifting Sands,
documentary film
on the very same YouTube channel you're watching this podcast.
Yeah, we could do it. We could do it better than that, because that was telling history, and it was sort of a sad story. This documentary would be like I think the idea is to make it inspirational.
Right. And if your talks are, as you put it, the boring part, that's a recipe for a great documentary. If seeing you give talks is the boring part, I know what you mean.
My point is, I find people interesting, and when people are confronted with something that's new, challenging, invigorating, enlightening, motivating, I like to see their reactions. And I think a good documentary crew could capture that and capture the spirit and the feeling. The whole idea is, and who knows, maybe I'll go to Russia and the Russians will say, get off the stage.
I doubt it.
I doubt it too. I probably wouldn't go to Russia if I thought that was going to happen, but you can't predict the future. But I do feel, having been to Russia in the past and currently interacting with Russians, that this is an idea that will be well received by Russians.
No question.
The challenge is, can we get it well received by Americans? But I think the key thing in making that happen is to educate Americans about how receptive the Russians are to the idea of living in peace and harmony with Americans, that there is no hatred. They're not plotting to overthrow us. They're not doing this. These are regular people that live regular lives, who have the same dreams and aspirations that we do. And all we have to do is work with them to send a signal to our government officials that we want peace. We want nuclear disarmament. We want arms control. And man, if we could get 1 million plus people in the streets in America and in Russia at the same time, working together in harmony, good God, what could be done? I mean, that's my dream.
Well, the thing is, we should start organizing immediately and have a lot of the pieces already in place before the documentary is even finished. Right. So we got to get to questions from the audience.
I forgot what the purpose of the show was.
Yeah, I think they call it "Ask the Inspector," not
the inspector
going to filibuster. Yeah. But just briefly, where are you at in getting the publishing rights to Waging Peace?
I'm waiting for a response. If I haven't heard a response at a certain time, then I can assume that we have them.
All right. You're telling me that you are making a good effort to do this, but trust but verify. I may need to see some documentation.
Well, all you need is the author to say, "Go."
All right.
Bob,
this is the lightning round. The weapons inspector answers every question in 3 minutes or less, or he gets the whip. Bob from Berlin, Germany, forgot the Y there. After the fall of the Soviet Union, did Eastern European countries ask to join NATO to avoid being under the sphere of Russian influence? Or was this imposed on them by NATO? Was there an alternative alliance on the table at that time?
There was no alternative alliance on the table at that time. We know now from the response that Secretary of State James Baker got when he came back after meeting with Gorbachev and Shevardnadze, and he briefed the National Security Council and the interagency on his talks, where he said, it's now, quote, we have the memorandum, NATO will not expand 1 inch eastward. He was told, wrong answer, boss. We're going to take it all because that's just what we're going to do. We're never going to let Russia challenge us again. In order to guarantee that never happens, we're going to take all their former satellite nations and make them ours. And they had a willing and receptive audience. There was a dream in the former Eastern Bloc countries that joining NATO automatically brought economic prosperity, automatically brought democracy, automatically brought perfection. They were bending over. I mean, before nations even joined, I traveled to Ukraine and Romania in 1997, and I was a UN official, but an American, and I was asking for their cooperation in getting rid of or helping us prevent the Iraqis from exploiting the black market to acquire certain technologies. And at the highest level, both Romania and Ukraine, they're all like, yeah, we'll help you, but you'll put in a good word to the United States for us, right, about joining NATO? You'll put in a good word for us? We really want to join NATO? And I'm like, I'm a UN official. I have nothing to do with that. They said, no, but you're an American. Just make sure the Americans know we want to join NATO. We want to join NATO. So there was no alternative. The East Bloc wanted to do it. A large part of it was motivated by anti-communist sentiment that existed in the newly empowered liberal wings of who are in government right now, or took government after the fall of the wall. But a lot of it was more than just ideological. A lot of it was economic hopes and dreams for a better life. That by joining NATO, they would have an end to the European Union. It would have an end to the Western largesse, the Western lifestyle, etc. So yeah.
Glenn Crowther from New South Wales. I'm sorry, let me try that one more time. There we go. Glenn Crowther from New South Wales. Wagner penal units? Can't see why a military force of privately contracted veterans and the characteristics you describe would recruit convicts. Is this bullshit?
It's not bullshit. First of all, Wagner is not exclusively a convict. Consist of convict. Wagner was created in 2014 as a vehicle to provide military expertise to Lugansk and Donetsk. The Russian army was prohibited by law from getting involved and directly, so they created this private military contractor. I have a feeling if you look at their documents, they may have been incorporated anywhere but Moscow, but they provide a different contracting vehicle. The Russian military is almost 75% contract, professional soldiers. Here in America, we call them volunteers. In Russia, they're called contract soldiers, meaning you go in and you sign a contract of service, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever. You sign up and do and you're paid as a professional. You're not a conscript. And Wagner is a contract vehicle. They contract people with specific military skills that they're looking for. Recently, Prigozhin who's the founder of Wagner, gave a speech to the first class of convicts to graduate and be released. A 6-month term. They sign up. They have to serve 6 months in combat, and then they are pardoned and they are returned to society. So this isn't something that's been going on for some time. Wagner started in 2014. They've built up considerable military expertise. But Wagner's involved in some of the heaviest fighting, some of the deadliest fighting, the most bloody fighting, the assault units that are going into urban combat. And so rather than burn through, their best fighters, they went to the prisons and they said, look, we're entering the meat grinder. And we need meat. And you guys all have criminal convictions. And we're giving you a chance to reset yourselves with Russian society. Join us, serve honorably. And if you live, you'll be pardoned. Some of the first, the 60% casualties on some of the initial intake. So out of every 10 convicts that signed up, 6 were either killed or wounded. So odds are against you coming out of this thing intact. And indeed, when you see him speaking to these Wagner veterans, the front row, nearly 30% of the people there are in wheelchairs, have crutches. They are seriously injured. These guys are shock troops. So they bring them in and they give them experienced leadership, but their job is go, go, go through the walls into the building, close with, destroy the enemy, and they're taking heavy casualties. And when they finish, they graduate. They're released. Look, in Vietnam, the United States Marine Corps, you just go take a look at what percentage of Marines were given the option in front of a judge to either enlist or go to jail. So it's not unique.
You're in big trouble. Red Pill from the Matrix. What are the odds that after this Ukrainian debacle, the U.S. just withdraws from the rest of the world and becomes isolationist again? Would that place the U.S. in a position of much greater strength long term?
I think the U.S. would benefit long term by accepting a multipolarity reality, meaning that they're one of several at the table instead of being the one at the head of the table, because that's unrealistic now. The problem is the United States isn't geared towards sharing the table with anybody. One only has to take a look at how American citizens respond to something as ridiculous as the Ryder Cup, a golf tournament where you have golf fans, instead of clapping politely, shouting USA, USA, USA. We turn everything into a sporting event. We turn everything into hyper patriotism, even though people don't even understand what they're being patriotic about. It's just like it's in our DNA. We get in a crowd, people start chanting USA. We all have to do the same thing. So no politician is going to willingly walk away from that, because that's political suicide. The public is geared towards this kind of American supremacy. We still believe in global manifest destiny. We believe America is the exceptional superpower. We are the essential nation. The world can't live without us. All this kind of stuff. The defeat in Ukraine is going to be one of many, many setbacks for the United States in the decades to come. We're going to have setbacks economically, more military setbacks, as we become accustomed to the reality that we don't get to dictate outcomes anymore, that it's a more complicated world, that our babies have grown up. They don't listen, they don't obey orders automatically anymore. The rules-based international order is no longer viable. Just because mama says doesn't mean the kid does anymore. The kid's going to do what the kid wants to do, and the world has grown up and they're going to do what they want to do. So that's going to be the interesting transition. I don't think the United States will or can ever become truly isolationist again, because we are too thoroughly integrated in the global economy and the global political scene to do that. But I do believe that we are going to have to adjust to the fact that we are going to be one of several at the table. And that we can no longer dictate outcomes, that we have to start working with people in a cooperative fashion to generate outcomes that are beneficial to all, not just one. Okay.
By the way, nice haircut and nice new glasses. Our favorite weapons inspector is now our hunky weapons inspector.
I wouldn't say that.
You don't have to say it. I'll say it for you. Mafti from Hong Kong. That's the Special Administrative Region, China. What are the odds that after this Ukrainian debacle?
That's the same one isn't that what you just answered?
It is. Oh my God. I'm going to have to fire myself. I made a big boo-boo. I apologize to whichever one of you didn't get the right question. All right. I'm under a lot of stress, as you know. So
I know. You can't figure out what wine to drink. It's tough.
Ultimata, an Antipodean, I think that's how to pronounce that, an Antipodean vassal state. I've heard murmurs on Telegram channels about Ukraine using chemical weapons in Soledar and Bakhmut. What do you know about this, Scott? I feel, if true, this isn't an issue that should be swept under the carpet.
Well, there's a video out there that shows Ukrainians preparing what appears to be hydrogen cyanide type chemical to be delivered using drones. And so they have a whole room full of drones, these little commercial drones that you can buy, and they're setting them up so that they can be used kamikaze-like to dive in and spread hydrogen cyanide, which would, of course, be chemical weapons and would be prohibited by law. let me put it this way. If a video emerged that showed Syrian government soldiers sitting there lecturing us, bragging about what they're doing, opening up a refrigerator with things like that, man, we would have OPCW teams swarming into Syria, surrounding them, drowning them with inspectors. Now we have the Ukrainians, what appears to be Ukrainians, doing this, and not a peep from anyone. There's been some talk that this isn't just some sort of propaganda or threat, that they've been talking about some Wagner soldiers in Bakhmut getting irritated, throat irritations and lung irritations from breathing in. That could be anything. I mean, you get into combat, there's cordite, there's dust in the air. When high explosives go off, it mixes with the dust. You're just breathing the world's worst crap into your lungs. And, if it's phosphorus containers, then or phosphine. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be something. If I'm not there to test it, I don't know. But the point is, somebody should be challenging Ukraine on this. Find out who these people are who made the video. They're identifiable. And then to question, is this just stupid propaganda? If it is, then the Ukrainian government needs to shut it down and say, we don't do chemical weapons. That's not what we do. But there's not a peep out of Ukraine. There's not a peep out of NATO. There's not a peep out of the West. There's not a peep out of the OPCW. I mean, again, they got this vaunted intelligence staff that sat there and watched news reports out of Syria and went, we must get involved. Hey, OPCW, there's a damn video showing Ukrainians preparing something, phosgene, or hydrogen cyanide for delivery against Russian troops, a violation of the chemical weapons treaty. What are you doing about it? Where's your inspection team? Where's your demand for entry? Where's your demand for cooperation? Where's your statement that if you don't cooperate, we're going to turn to the Security Council and ask for a military strike? Silence.
All right. So whomever got gypped out of a question, I'll make sure we'll get that in Friday. And I'll put the music credit in the YouTube description for the music we used in the opening. Agnostic from British Columbia, Canada. As the Ukrainians get better at retreating, what would happen if the Russians pushed the Ukrainian forces all the way to their western borders? How would NATO react?
Well, we're going to find out. I think tomorrow Putin's giving a big speech, and something tells me that the speech might be linked to maybe the next phase in the conflict, which means the green flare is going to go up, and the Russian forces are going to start meaningful offensive operations. And then we'll find out how good the Ukrainians are at retreating. They're not very good right now because they tend to die. And I think the Russians are going to hit the accelerator and just press them. And one concept that comes to mind is collapse. So we'll see whether the Russians take it all the way to the Western Ukrainian border, or to the border between Western Ukraine and Poland and Hungary and Romania and all. I don't know. They have X number of troops. Ukraine's a big country, and they don't want to make the same mistake of spreading out too far. So we'll see what the Russians do, though. But I have a funny feeling the Russians have thought through what the next steps are, and the next steps are designed to be decisive in nature. Russia doesn't want this war to go on forever. Russia doesn't want this war to end with this cancerous, odious, infected state called Zelensky's Ukraine still intact. I think Russia's looking for a decisive end to this conflict, and NATO's going to have to accept it. The bottom line is NATO can do nothing, and it can provide weapons. I mean, wow, the British are providing 14 Challenger 2 tanks. 14, Jeff. 14. That's a lot. It's not really a lot. The Zaluzhny asked for 300, and the British gave him 14. Good job, England. But that's it. Peskov said no statement. Okay, well, now we don't. So maybe tomorrow's something different. But the bottom line is, at some point in time, the Russians are going to pull the trigger. And when they do, I think they're not going to keep their foot off the gas. It's just going to keep the pressure going and going and going and going. So, we'll see. But NATO, all NATO can do is continue to bankrupt itself financially and militarily by providing equipment and funding to a Ukrainian war effort that is not up to the task. As Russians would say, it's inadequate.
Odious.
Kevin Michalizzi is handling backstage duties today. Thanks for helping us out with that info, Kevin. Fu from Chicago. What do you think of the recent Center for Strategic and International Studies report that says that the Battle of Taiwan will end with a Pyrrhic victory for the U.S.-Japan coalition forces?
Let me tell you what I think of the CSIS. These are people who have corrupted themselves in their integrity by being willing to serve as mouthpiece for Western interests. How do I know? Because CSIS issued a ridiculous report in the fall of 2002 that basically said Iraq has WMD, and it justified the military action against Iraq. And right now, what's happened is every time a war game is done, the West loses. America loses. We can't beat the Chinese in a war game about Taiwan unless we really, really skew the results. I mean, we have to program in artificial things like all of our airplanes work all of the time. Capabilities that aren't going to be ready for 4 years are now ready. And the Chinese, of course, are incompetent, can't execute, can't do anything. So we do all that, and it comes out as a Pyrrhic victory. No, the CSIS is not a credible think tank. It's a propaganda tool, and that's what it's being used for right now. Their job is to create the perception that it is possible for the West to win. Even if it's a Pyrrhic victory, it's possible. That defeat isn't the only outcome. So no, I don't have any respect for that organization.
Big Rich, a Russian in the UK. I've heard you say when describing the peace deal in 2014 that Russia was winning, but Putin chose peace, as if Russia was the one fighting Ukraine and Donbass back then. Could you please clarify what you mean, since OSCE, that's the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in case you didn't know, Scott, didn't report any Russian forces there?
Well, we know that the Russians were firing artillery. We know that. The artillery was fired from Russian soil into Ukraine, but the Russian artillery is what destroyed 2 battalions of Ukrainian forces in one of the worst single-day setbacks ever. It's the thing that NATO woke up to, because these 2 battalions were organized as if they were NATO-like. And in a single day of Russian artillery interdiction, they became gone. So that was a wake-up call. But the battle I'm referring to is one where the Ukrainians came in. It's a village north of the big city of Donetsk, and it looked like the Ukrainians had surrounded the Donetsk militia, was getting ready to take them out, and suddenly they got hit with 2 pincers. Where did these pincers come from? I don't care what the OSCE says. The casualty reports point to at least one brigade of Russian armor, the 8th Brigade, 8th Armor Brigade, being involved, because there's tanks from the 8th Armor Brigade, and Russian soldiers are being returned home in caskets from the 8th Armor Brigade. So Russians were taking casualties in Ukraine. I don't care what the OSCE says. I'm just telling you what the facts are, which is why Putin was the decision maker. Putin had made the decision that he was committing troops to the battlefield for a decisive outcome. He was going to destroy the Ukrainian army, therefore eliminate the threat to Donbass. And that's why Minsk was so important, because Minsk stopped that battle. Now, it didn't stop that battle per se. It put a ceasefire. And then when the Ukrainians tried to withdraw, they suffered horrific casualties. Withdrawing, 3,000 guys were killed, and then Minsk II came into place, and that pretty much created a stalemate from 2015 until 2022. But no, I don't think there's any doubt that Russian troops were involved, even though the Russian government hasn't formally acknowledged it. The reality is there were significant Russian troops engaged in the Donbass in 2014.
Fan from Australia, Russian in UK. I think I might have made another mistake. Fan from Australia. Do you think the U.S. government will list PMC Wagner, I believe that's Private Military Corporation, as a terrorist organization? And what could the implications be for the North African countries and U.S.-Russia relations if it does?
I mean, there's a possibility they will. There's a lot of political pressure on them to do that. But the reality is that Wagner, even though it's called a PMC, private military corporation or company, is an adjunct of the Russian general staff. And, the U.S. has to be careful here because we use, we used to use Blackwater a lot. We still use a lot of private military, corporations. A lot of PMCs contract with the CIA to provide capabilities, paramilitary capabilities for the CIA. The Department of Defense uses private military contracts to do training work around the world. The CIA has, as I alluded, has a paramilitary wing, the Special Activities Division or Special Activities Group, and the U.S. military oftentimes sheep dips special operators over to the CIA, chops them over, so that while they're operating, they're doing so under the legal authorities of the CIA, which are different from the legal authorities of Department of Defense. We saw that, for instance, in the assault on Osama bin Laden. SEAL Team 6 was chopped over to the CIA for that operation. So if we call Wagner a terrorist organization, we're opening the door for the Russians to pass similar legislation, which put a lot of Americans at risk. So that would be one of the more foolish things that the United States could do.
Sparty Matt from the great state of Michigan. Any chance one of Scott's public talks would focus entirely on the history of Nazis in Ukraine? That's an interesting idea. I think a lot of people with blue and yellow flags in their Twitter bio don't understand that part of history and might be more willing to listen to Scott's analysis of the war if they knew that, instead of just listening to the media saying there is no Nazi problem in Ukraine.
I'm not opposed to this. The problem is this. When we speak of Bandera, who is the Stepan Bandera, who's sort of the founder of the modern ultranationalist movement, and he's definitely the spiritual core for Ukrainian nationalists today. People will automatically say he had no other choice, that he had to do bad things in support of Ukrainian nationalism, that his motivations were just, but his means were harsh. And as soon as they say that, it becomes difficult now to move forward, because they've just literally accepted as something not to be condemned. Mass murder, the murder of Jews, tens of thousands, 110,000 Poles in the Volyn campaign, 200,000 Russians in a decade of fighting from 1944 until 1953. And how do you begin to break that down? So then you again talk about how they worked with the Nazis and cooperated with the Nazis, and they say, yes, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and their real enemy was the Soviet Union. Stalin was the real enemy. They just do all this deflection. So I don't think that there's a lot of ignorance. I mean, yes, in America, a lot of ignorance, and a lot of people wearing the little, what do they call that? Virtue signaling. Look at me, I've got my Ukrainian flag on. I'm a good person. Yes, they don't know the truth, but the hardcore people, no, I've already had conversations with them and some people that I respect, and their whole thing is, Bandera, brought to life Ukrainian nationalism during very difficult times, and that if you're going to take on Adolf Hitler and Stalin at the same time, you have to, it's going to be a tough thing. It's a tough fight. Casualties are made. And so they've excused away, his link with Nazi Germany, his anti-Semitism, and the fact that he has said in order to get the Ukrainian nation, millions of people might have to be killed in the process.
Okay. Yes, no question. Getting back to what the guy was asking, is the topic interesting and important enough to warrant an entire talk about it? And is there enough to say to fill up an entire talk?
The way I would suggest we approach this is on one of our lightning rounds, we make it exclusively questions about Ukraine's Nazi past and the links to Nazi and things like that. And so the only questions we'll entertain is that, and then we'll give it an hour. It'll be an hour-long conversation.
Okay. JD from the great state of Connecticut, where I am currently working on some events, and hopefully we'll get that confirmed before too long. How could an accidental and or intentional nuclear exchange be kicked off? What would have to happen and or how would it happen?
Well, I believe, first of all, the initiator would be from the United States, not Russia. Russia isn't going to initiate a nuclear strike. I think the big thing would be a NATO intervention that prompted a serious Russian conventional response, one that did strike NATO countries. Because I think Russia has made it clear that if NATO intervenes in Ukraine, that all NATO becomes a target. And I think Russia would use conventional weapons to take out some very critical leadership nodes, decision-making nodes, et cetera, maybe including NATO headquarters, Ramstein Air Base, where they have a big, it's where they do a lot of coordination with the Ukrainians, and some Polish air bases and things where they receive logistics. And they do that in a manner that just humiliates NATO to the point that NATO feels, and the United States feels necessary to send a signal to escalate, to de-escalate. We keep accusing the Russians of having that theory, but it's purely 100% ours. And we fire off a limited nuclear strike to send a signal to the Russians, enough is enough. And the problem is Russia has said they won't be the first to use nuclear weapons, but they won't be the second, meaning they're not going to wait for that to hit. Prior to that hitting, they will launch an all-out retaliation and the world ends. So that's how I think a scenario like that unfolds.
All right, that could ruin my whole weekend. I am Spartacus from Mousy, Kentucky. Let me get this shot in here. There's something weird about this. I am Spartacus from Mousy, Kentucky. Your recent comments at Ask My Favorite Weapons Inspector, suggesting all those who question the official 9/11 narrative are cockeyed conspiracy theorists, is a foul and odious ideology. You too, Jeff. This is why I avoid riding on double-decker buses, because there's no driver on the top. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm pretty sure it's an insult. But I'm happy that he called it Ask My Favorite Weapons Inspector and also used the word odious.
Odious.
And that's all I'm going to say about that. Next question.
Okay. Might be the best way to handle those people, actually. James from South Africa, is there any scenario where China would feel compelled to step in militarily, boots on the ground and hardware, to assist Russia? Given if Russia falls, China would be fighting Western advances alone.
No, there's no scenario. China is not going to send Chinese troops into Ukraine. Russia would never accept Chinese troops in Ukraine. Logistically, it's a nightmare. No military commander would ever propose this. China's never prepared for this kind of conflict. It's against Chinese operational doctrine. I don't think there's any legal foundation in this for China. Just no. Russia's going to win. I mean, remember, right? Russia mobilized 300,000 troops. If this fails, and I don't think it will, but if it fails, there's 22.7 million other reservists out there. So Russia's got a long way to go before they need China, and they don't want China to come in military, and China doesn't want to get involved militarily. Remember, China's focused on Taiwan, and it isn't just going to be Taiwan. Then if China has a war with Taiwan, China has to worry about all of the Pacific. So the last thing China's going to do is divert significant resources to Ukraine, and in the process, generate massive global outrage. One of the key aspects for China is how to emerge from any potential conflict in Taiwan with their global reputation intact. China is not going to have too much of an intact reputation globally for intervening in Ukraine. Plus, China's doing everything they can right now to keep Russia afloat. I mean, they're buying the energy. They're working with the Indians to buy energy. Russia had a 28% profit increase in profits for a nation that's supposed to be so heavily sanctioned. When their books grow by 28%, they ain't shrinking, they ain't dying. So that's what China's doing. China's providing the leadership for the non-aligned world to continue to do business with Russia. That's where China's most valuable. The last thing either China or Russia would ever want or need is Chinese troops, boots on the ground in Ukraine. It would just be a disaster.
All right, let's do one more question submitted in advance, and then let's squeeze in some live questions from the folks on YouTube and Facebook. Aiden, Normandy, France. Who are the masters of war in Russia? How does it work? Who do they obey? Are they private, public? Where does the money come from, and who earns the dividends? That's an interesting question.
I think he's pretty much talking. I hope I'm getting this right. His equivalent of the military-industrial complex.
I think that's the way I took it.
Yeah. Look, Russia has an advanced defense industry. But the defense industry, even though they're joint stock corporations, the joint is the Russian government. So the defense industry doesn't exist to turn an exorbitant or obscene profit. The defense industry exists to serve the Russian nation. And that's the biggest difference right there. And so the defense industry responds to the needs, wants, and desires of the Russian government. To the extent that I guess you could say who are the masters of war. Like anything, defense industry contributes to the economy, the local economy. So I would imagine that governors of districts that have significant defense industry establishments in place, they have a system geared, for instance, to train the proper engineers. So there's a pipeline between institutions that train engineers and the defense industries themselves. We can't pretend that there isn't a complex, but they don't have the same influence and role. It's just different. The Russians have done a good job of inheriting the Soviet system of factory directors and who work as part of design teams, who have interests in who have backing in the defense industry and the defense industry board. It's a similar situation today, but I think the big difference is with the Russians is that it's more about political power or professional power, professional prestige, professional status. Than it is about making billions of dollars. I think in America, the portfolio of the Raytheon CEO is far more important to him than the status of being Raytheon CEO. Whereas I think in Vodkinsk, the director of the Vodkinsk factory is known around town as sort of a big man in town. That's a good guy. The CEO of Raytheon doesn't walk around whatever city he's in and have everybody bow down to him. The director of the Vodkinsk factory walks around Vodkinsk and everybody's tipping their hat because they know who controls the primary means of income generation in the area. Now, I haven't been to Vodkinsk for a long time, and I understand that there's other industries there. It's a modern city with things, but I still would imagine that the Vodkinsk Production Association holds sway over Vodkinsk.
Okay, and you can read about that in Scott's book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. And I can never say that title without pointing out that it rolls right off the tongue. All right, let's take some questions from our beloved audience live. What do you got, Kevin? Thanks to Kevin Michelizzi for doing a great job as usual backstage.
Oh, we have got a bunch today.
How about one?
How about one to start with?
How will NATO react when the world sees their tanks are not invincible?
The million-dollar question. Germany's made a lot of money selling Leopard 2 tanks. If you take a look at a map of NATO countries and around, Leopard 2 is in a lot of arsenals. And I'm here to tell you right now, the Leopard 2 will be a death trap on the battlefield. It's just not going to be what Germany thinks it's going to be or what the Ukrainians think it's going to be. It's going to die. That's going to be sort of humiliating for the Germans. The Challenger 2, it's a decent tank, but 14 of them, it's a company. And what happens when a company meets a battalion? They're all going to die. They're not supported by artillery. They're just going to be open. They're vulnerable to everything. A tank is a weapon. A tank works best as a part of a system. Combined arms support, artillery support, close air support, infantry to protect them. You bring then the Challenger 2 tank into this environment, it's going to die. It's just going to be yet another humiliation for NATO, just like the Patriot air defense system is going to turn out to be a humiliation for NATO. There's not enough of them. They're not that good. These aren't game-changing technologies. I mean, the Challenger's been around for a long time. So it's not like the Russians don't know about it. It's not like the Russians never said, well, what if the British sent a brigade and we had to fight a British brigade in the plains of Poland? What are we going to get to destroy the Challenger? And it's not like the Russian defense industry never said, hey, why don't we try this round? It's actually perfect for the Chobham armor on the Challenger. I bet you the Russians have anti-tank rounds designed to kill the Chobham tank armor. And I bet you when those 14 Chobham armored Challenger 2 vehicles show up on the battlefield, that the Russians will have the appropriate response for them, which will result in the Chobham armor being pierced like a hot knife or hot butter with a hot knife. There you go. Get the analogy straight before you speak it, and blow up. So it's just going to be bad for NATO all around. It's going to show NATO the reality of the fact that for the last 20 years, they've been singularly focused on fighting farmers and villagers in Afghanistan and Iraq. And they forgot, that there's a real army out there called Russians, and the Russians haven't. The Russians have been training and equipping to fight a NATO type army since at least 2008.
Okay. Rajab Abasov, thanks for the tip. Do you think even after Russia wins, will the West admit it caused the war and build Ukraine's economy, or will they stick to its lies like how the West always does?
I mean, this is it's an unknowable. I think the bottom line is that Europe, because I think what's going to happen after Russia wins, because I do believe Russia is going to win, that the West is going to become very fractured, and that we're going to have 3 schools develop. One will be the American school, which is, of course, we are the exceptional superpower. It's not our fault they lost. The Ukrainians can't fight. Europe sucks, all that, but it's not our fault.
Ignore that.
Europe. Pardon?
Sorry, ignore that. Go ahead.
Oh, then Europe is going to fracture at least into 2 schools of thought. One is we need to double down on NATO and get more American support in Europe. And the other one's going to be, screw that. That didn't work. America set us up for failure, and we need to start promoting an exclusive European security framework where Europe looks out for Europe's best interests. And I think Russia's going to want to talk to the latter, to talk to the ones who look out for European interests and come up with a new European security framework that deals. The interesting thing is I think this division is going to be old Europe, the old NATO countries moving away from the United States, and the new Europe, the Baltic countries and Poland, maybe the Czech Republic, being the ones that want heavy commitment. And we might see something where the United States, either with or without NATO, doubles down in providing support for these new countries in some sort of treaty relationship. But I think we're going to see a divide, a fracture in Europe. And I think we're going to see the United States become increasingly isolated from Europe, because there's a lot of resentment right now, not just about the military quagmire. That'll become more evident when Russia wins. But the economy, you got the Germans and the French very mad at the United States about how they've caused them to divorce from Russian gas, but charge them, horrific prices for American liquid natural gas. And industries are shutting down, jobs are fleeing, and the Germans and the French are waking up to the fact that America's not their friend.
Okay, we're at the 1 hour mark now, but since we were a little chattier than usual at the beginning, do you want to a little loquacious, more so than usual? Do you want to go a few more minutes, give them a few more live questions? You got the time?
Absolutely.
All right. Andres Groudens, thank you, Andres. I'd like to know Scott's opinion regarding the World Economic Forum's role for RU. What's RU?
Russia.
Oh, okay. As some of their ideas are implemented in Russia, and yet the Russian leaders are against them.
Look, there's a divorce right now. The World Economic Forum, Russia doesn't care. I mean, a year ago or 2 years ago, Russia was making an effort to work within the World Economic Forum's, ideal or intellectual, framework to come up with a way to cooperate with the West. Russia's divorced from the West. It's over. Putin just divorced from Europe totally. He's not obeying. He's broken with the European Council. He's broken with the European Union. It's over. The World Economic Forum can meet in Davos and they can talk all they want. Russia ain't listening. Russia doesn't care. As I've always said, the honey badger don't give a damn. And Russia is the honey badger, and they just don't care anymore about the West. The West blew it. And so you have a bunch of pompous, hot air filled balloons sitting there spewing hot gas. Russia's not listening. Russia's coming up with a new reality, a new way of doing business. So the World Economic Forum is literally irrelevant when it comes to Russia.
Okay, moving on to our next question. Merdad. Scott, can you please talk about the situation in Yemen? I love to hear your opinion. Much love from Iran. Much love right back at you, and thanks for the tip.
I could speak intelligently about Yemen up to mid-December, I think. But after that, I'm just going to be honest. It's been off my radar, and I know, hit me with lightning, all you want, whip me. Yemen should never be off anybody's radar because of the humanitarian disaster that's taking place there. I've just been singularly focused on Ukraine since that point. I apologize for that because it is a serious issue, one that I have focused on and written about. When the last I looked at Yemen, there was a ceasefire agreement was collapsing, primarily because of the lack of integrity shown by Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and others regarding the lifting of sanctions, the supplying of food, etc. And the Houthis, were likewise not willing to shut down totally their stranglehold they had on, it begins with an M. There's a city they had surrounded and all that. I don't know how the fighting has progressed. I haven't seen it in the headlines, so I don't think Yemen, either side, has scored a major victory. I think it's more the same. I don't know if that ceasefire is renewed. I have to be honest. I have to go back and look up on it. But I will say this: the Yemen conflict is, it's a stain on Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Arab states who aligned with Saudi Arabia. The Houthis have fought heroically and successfully. The Yemeni people have paid a horrific price and will continue to pay a horrific price for some time to come. There's some of the worst famine-related incidents, the disease that comes with that have accrued from this. The children are paying a price that shouldn't be paid. And it's also gotten caught up in regional geopolitics. I think one of the difficulties in resolving the Yemen situation is that, from the Western perspective, Yemen has aligned itself with Iran, has become part of the axis of resistance that Iran has created to stand up against, American hegemony in the Middle East and the role played by America's allies, Israel, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and others, to try and suppress Iran's concerns. So Yemen's caught in the middle of this struggle, and it's just an absolute tragedy. But I will endeavor to catch up, and maybe I'll write something about it. So that's my way of saying I'm sorry. I wish I had been in a better place to answer that question.
Okay, those of you watching on Twitch, Twitter, and Rumble, please understand that we cannot see your comments that are coming in live. So it's only on Facebook and YouTube that we can see the comments and questions live. What else you have, Kevin? Rowdy Every Point. Thank you so much, Rowdy. Great name. What are the chances, if Russia total victory over Ukraine, that Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, or Moldova assimilate conquered Ukrainian territory?
This is the big $1 million question. I don't think Poland's going to be allowed to do it at all. Belarus has said, Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, has said that the one way to guarantee that Belarus sends troops into Ukraine is if Poland makes a move on Western Ukraine. Belarus isn't going to allow the Poles to extend their border, which is a hostile border, and wrap it around, Belarus's southern districts. It just isn't going to be permitted. So I don't know what Poland thinks is going to happen, but I think Belarus and the Russians have made it clear what they are going to do, which is destroy any Polish effort to do that. They won't be allowed to occur. If Hungary seeks to reincorporate I think there's 200,000 Hungarian-speaking Ukrainians who, by the way, I mean, if you want to help promote Russia or Ukraine or Hungarian intervention, do what the Ukrainians are doing, sending the right sector there, threatening to hang and burn and rape and murder anybody who talks about, Hungarian autonomy. The same thing with the Romanians, Moldovans, etc. And here's the other problem. The Europeans have, the West, collective West has, at the end of World War II, one of the great aspects, concepts they bought into is that the borders are not to be violated, that the borders are permanent, that the day and age of countries invading other countries and redrawing borders is over. Well, then the West blew it with Kosovo because they pretty much got Serbia. They stripped away Kosovo and then they declared it to be independent and all that. And now Russia's moved into Ukraine and taken away 5 territories, Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea, and they're probably going to take away more. Now Europe can legitimize all this by saying, well, then Ukraine's free game. Go in, boys, cut it up, just do it any way you want. One, I don't know how Russia's going to respond to that. We know that Poland won't be allowed to do it, but is Hungary going to do it or others going to do it? Don't know. But that would be the end, because once that happens, every border becomes, temporary in nature. What happens if the Germans decide they want to take Alsace-Lorraine again? They say, used to belong to us, we'll take it. What if they look over to Poland and say, yeah, Silesia is looking pretty good too. We're going to take that too. What happens when, Serbia takes a look at Croatia and says, all those areas that you kicked Serbians out of, we're coming back there. It's a free-for-all at that point in time, and Europe has struggled hard to prevent that kind of mindset from, gaining access and influence in the minds of European leaders. So I think it's not going to be as easy politically for people to even execute that. I know the polls are full of some crazy nationalists that's taking over, but I would imagine the European Union and European Commission and NATO would try and put the brakes on that, because that would put them in a trajectory they don't want to go. Because once you start covering up the map of Europe, it's over, baby. They're all going to be fighting each other.
All right, that's it for this week's edition of Ask the Inspector, the lightning round. Our format is to do 1 hour maximum, with Scott answering all questions in 3 minutes or less. Since we were a little bit chatty in the opening and our opening was longer than usual, we extended it by about 10 minutes. I'd like to remind folks that Scott's new article can be read. We are not behind a paywall. But if you want to sign up for a paid subscription, we certainly appreciate your support. Trust but verify at scottritterextra.com. And my tweet designed to rattle Elon Musk's cage is embedded in that article. So there's a link to that, asking everybody who reads the article or anybody who hears about it to please make some noise and try to get Scott back on Twitter, or at the very least an explanation as to what the hell is going on. Sunday is our other podcast, Scenes from the Evolution. Kevin Michelizzi, Tori Mansfield, and myself are the co-hosts. Thanks to Kevin, who handled the backstage duties so ably today. And the loquacious version of Ask the Inspector will be Friday night, as per usual, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Kevin.
And I would just like to mention that the people who gave us tips with questions, we will make sure Scott gets those questions on Friday or Thursday.
Okay. Friday. Okay. And you mentioned that you've got some enthusiasm, Kevin, in terms of Scott's plan to go to Russia and some folks who might be able to help, right?
I do have contacts. So you have an American living in Russia who has people who can help, Scott. So ask for anything you need and I'll find somebody.
Okay. So the inspector is going to be asking, how do we do this? This is Ask the Inspector. But
the squeaky leaker.
We'll come up with something. Thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Okay. Take care, everybody.